Robert Thomas graduated from medical school at the age of 22. He wrote a medical doctorate which won him a number of prizes, including the 1995 British Oncology Association Prize. He's been a consultant at Addenbrooke's in Cambridge since 1996. If CV247 was to find credibility in medical circles, Robert Thomas was the man for the job.
We do plenty of scientific laboratory-based trials. This one came along and it was just slightly different. It involved diet first of all, which is an area very poorly understood in the development of cancer, and also once patients have cancer. There are very few clinical trials on diet, so I thought that was an interesting area. Secondly, I like the philosophy of this compound. We're not trying to kill the cancer cell, we're trying to persuade it to become dormant and behave like a normal cell. So again, the philosophy behind the trial was interesting. I like the idea that patients now have something to do. They can actually have some control to change their lifestyle and change their diet. And again, I like that aspect of it.
But first, the trial had to be approved by the Ethics Committee, an organisation more accustomed to dealing with trials of a single drug, without the variable of expecting patients to make lifestyle changes.
They had a slight problem with the fact that there are really 4 endpoints in this study. CV247 contains 4 chemicals, and patients have to adopt a lifestyle and dietary change. So what they're actually saying is which one of those factors are actually the most important in contributing to the anti-cancer effect. It needed a little bit of persuasion to say to them, well, we do plenty of scientific trials, we investigate one chemical, and occasionally we have to look a little bit more laterally and say, well, let's look at an overall strategy, let's look at a more holistic approach to fighting cancer. And I think after a little bit of persuasion, they actually said, yeah, that's appropriate.
40 patients were recruited for the first part of the trial. Trials can only be conducted on patients who've exhausted all the usual options or who are not suitable for conventional treatment. Josie was in the first group. Her ovarian cancer had returned 3 times after grueling experiences with chemotherapy.
The side effects of chemotherapy are horrendous. You feel so tired, completely and utterly lethargic, and I lost my hair and generally felt terribly unwell.
Josie and her husband enthusiastically took to growing their own organic food. Despite the fact that colleagues had told Robert Thomas that he'd never get patients to change their lifestyle, none of the patients on the trial had any problems about adopting an organic diet.
The cynics to this study have always said patients will not cooperate enough to change their diet, they won't change their lifestyle, it's been ingrained for years so they can't change now. That's not true at all. Most patients have been very pleased to have their own self-control, their own autonomy, they feel empowered, they all go away and they enthusiastically change their diet, and we really have not had any problems with what we call compliance. And again, that changes the whole structure of the patient and their family. Their well-being is increased as a consequence of this.
Geoffrey Reed and his wife buy most of their produce, but even on a pension, they have no qualms about it being a good investment.
I don't mind at all. The cost of organic food is a bit more, but if it's going to do Jeff good, that's all right. He has a lot of other troubles which hurt him, you know, his legs and his back rather. But his colouring has changed quite a lot since he started on this treatment, and I think he's quite a lot better.
Well, it makes sense because it's something that's new, and it's the difference between probably going and having laser treatment, and this is quite simple, and if it works it'll be a wonderful thing.
Geoffrey has advanced prostate cancer indicated by measuring what are called prostate-specific antigens, or PSAs, in his blood. After only a couple of months on the trial, he's already showing signs of a reduction in his cancer.
You've got cancer of the prostate, and your PSA before you started this study was climbing. In fact, it climbed to 52.
Correct, yes.
When we did a PSA 1 month into the study, it was 50, and I'm pleased to inform you now that your last blood test has stayed stable at 50.
Good, yes, good.
So what appears to have happened is before the trial, your PSA was climbing gradually, who started taking the medication, and the PSA seems to have stabilised.
It's doing a good job.
Sidney's prostate cancer was not as advanced as Geoffrey's, but he had come to the stage where radiotherapy was looming. As an obviously lively man who loves to trek the countryside with his grandchildren and their dog, he didn't fancy the side effects. Since taking CV247 with an organic diet, his PSA has dropped and stabilised.
I certainly don't feel any worse, and no, I still manage to get my long walks with the dog in the morning and play about with the kids, and so no, everything's going very well. My blood count has now dropped to 6.6 and has held around that figure on the last 3 blood tests.
So what's actually happening to those people who are benefiting from this trial? With a multifaceted treatment like this one, the answers won't be simple.
One of the ways in which CV247 may in fact work is to have an action on the adhesion molecules. Now, adhesion molecules are really the glue which stick cells onto the basement membrane, and in cancer cells these molecules are not as sticky as they should be, which means that the abnormal cells, the tumour cells, can float off into the tissues, in fact, and grow through the tissues and even into the lymphatics and the blood supply, and then they can spread all over the body. Now, CV247 is thought to increase the stickiness of the glue which adheres the cells to the basement membrane. There's another possibility as well, in that any growing tissue and cancer cells have forgotten really that they should stop dividing, so they just go on and on and on. And there is a possibility that it may affect the blood supply. Any growing tissue has to generate a blood supply, otherwise it will just be starved and die. And there is a possibility that CV247 may in fact help to starve the tumour of nutrients and oxygen by inhibiting the production of new blood vessels into the tumour.
I think that many people who die when they have cancer die from a failure of their immune system, because cancer depresses the immunity. Unfortunately, both chemotherapy and radiation also depress the immunity. So when a patient goes to receive treatment with chemotherapy or radiation and it's unsuccessful, they still have cancer after the treatment, their immunity has been weakened by the treatment they've had as well as by the cancer. And then, of course, people often stop eating when they have advanced cancer. If they don't eat, they're not getting any nutrition. And within a few days, their immunity can become so weak that they die of either heart failure or pneumonia, the same as old people, very old people die of old age, the same reason. So I thought it's very important indeed to boost the immune system. And that's why I recommend very strongly that those who have this treatment do their best to boost their immune systems by eating only organic food, free of added salt and sugar.
Ian Beattie is the newest recruit to the trial. When he was diagnosed with lymphoma, he decided to retire early from work to concentrate on his beekeeping. It's too early to say if CV247 will prolong his life, but it does maintain his well-being.
Initially I was diagnosed in May of 1997, and what I had were swellings in my groin. So I went to the hospital, and I actually had a biopsy in August that year, so it took 3 months for them to get around to doing a biopsy. I started treatment in November that year. So from May to November was the time it took between diagnosis and treatment. What happened in May of this year, the lumps started to then come up in my neck, so the lymph glands in my neck started to swell up. So obviously this is progression going on. So I went to see Dr. Thomas, and I was given 3 options there. One was to leave things alone to see what would happen. The second option was to take part in the trial, which is the middle option. And the third option was to go into full chemotherapy. Vanity came into it a little bit, because the full chemotherapy is the whole hair loss business and what have
A great plus is that CV247 seems to make patients feel incredibly well and full of energy. Josie's cancer, which was progressing rapidly, has been stopped in its tracks.
So in a way this has helped you in a sense that you haven't had a dramatic shrinkage of tumour, but yet it hasn't progressed significantly over that period of time.
Absolutely, and I felt well.
Okay, that's excellent.
Not everyone responds to the CV247 regime, but it is as successful as any other phase 1 and phase 2 drug trial, and it has no side effects. What's more, when new oral cancer drugs cost around £20,000 per patient per year, CV247 is unlikely to cost any more than a few hundred. So the numbers of patients who do respond to John Carter's concoction point to an interesting, safe and cheap possibility for future cancer treatment.
I have to stress that all the patients entering this study all had progressive cancer at the trial entry. So if we achieve stabilisation, that is a good endpoint, a good achievement. So what's happened so far as regards to tumour response? We've had some patients who were very unwell when we started the study, and I'm afraid they were a little bit too far gone to offer any help, and they've unfortunately progressed. There's a small group of patients, quite surprisingly, who've actually seen a tumour shrinkage. So as well as improving their quality of life, as well as improving their psychological outlook to their illness, they've actually seen shrinkage in their tumour and a reduction in the tumour markers, or the chemicals which cancer secretes. The larger group, however, is what we really were hoping for, is that patients have progressive disease at trial entry and then they stabilise. And the big question is, of course, how long can that be maintained for? It's too early to say whether this is a significant breakthrough, if you like, but it's at least an interesting start.
If it's effective in either stabilising or reversing terminal cancer, how effective would it be in the treatment of newly diagnosed cancers? And I've seen the results with animals, and 1 or 2 people as well.
I think CV247 is a brilliant idea because it's a much more natural thing to do. It doesn't involve the dreadful effects that you get from the chemotherapy. I've been on it now for about 9 months and I've felt completely well the whole time.
The major pharmaceutical companies spend millions every year on cancer research. How extraordinary then that one dedicated and determined London vet with no financial backing may have found an effective and harmless treatment for cancer without causing suffering to any human or animal in the process.